suspensions, political expression, equal protection in education, and protections against arbitrary state actions that limited young people's freedom of speech and reproductive control. In a series of landmark decisions, the U.S. support granted young people certain procedural rights in juvenile court proceedings and guaranteed students the right to free speech and expression. In 1977, the court invalidated state laws prohibiting the sale of condoms to minors and subsequently struck down state laws requiring parental consent or notice if their children sought contraceptives. It also extended access to abortion to juveniles. State and federal legislation reduced voting and drinking ages. Other legislative actions and judicial rulings prohibited sex discrimination in educational programs and guaranteed children with disabilities access to a free and appropriate education. Let me jump ahead here to the last and fifth phase in the development of children's rights, which is often characterized as a backlash, but which I think is better understood as a quest for balance between notions of child protection and notions of children's autonomy. The elaboration of children's autonomy rights in the late 1960s and early 1970s prompted resistance and reaction. Fears about teen pregnancy, stranger abductions, juvenile violence, pedophiles, and gang membership all sparked a strong public reaction. Abstinence-only sex education, V-chips in television sets, juvenile curfews, school dress codes, graduated driver's licenses, random drug testing of students in extracurricular activities, and zero-tolerance policies represented attempts to counteract the impact of a permissive culture on young people's lives. Since the mid-1970s, I will argue, courts and legislators have sought to chart a middle ground between advocacy of children's liberation and demands for children's protection. In the majority opinion in the Tinker case, Associate Justice Abe Fortas wrote that schools were special places and that civil liberties had to be balanced against, quote, the need for affirming the comprehensive authority of the states and of school officials to prescribe and control conduct. And I believe in education you can see this effort by the courts to find a balance between students' rights and the rights of principals and teachers and school boards. So, for example, the justices held that school officials may search student lockers, but only when they have grounds for believing that a specific locker contains dangerous or illegal items, or that they may impose random drug tests, but only on students engaged in extracurricular activities. The courts also allowed school authorities to censor school newspapers only when they were sponsored by the school itself. A comparative international perspective reveals that discussions in the United States about children's rights are surprisingly circumscribed and even impoverished. In Austria, Brazil, Cuba, the Isle of Man, and Nicaragua, 16-year-olds can vote in all elections. In Norway, since 1981, children with a grievance can call a government-appointed ombudsperson to receive, investigate, and act on their complaint. In Sweden, by the early 20s, young adults can receive loans to ensure their financial independence from their parents. It's ironic that our society, which invented the concept of children's rights, now lags far behind many other countries, not only in the provisions it makes for children's well-being, but even in its ability to envision children's rights. Unlike many comparable societies, the United States remains much more committed to the privacy and autonomy of the nuclear family and to the notion that children should remain financially dependent upon their parents. Today, the United States is distinctive among advanced industrial societies in the prolongation of childhood dependence, especially among middle-class and upper middle class kids. The high cost of college education and housing has meant that for many young people, financial dependence persists well into their 20s and even into their 30s. In contrast to many European countries, young people attain financial autonomy. In contrast, in many European countries, young people attain financial autonomy at a much younger age. In many of these countries, college is free and young people receive stipends while they go to school. The past 200 years witnessed the emergence of two pivotal ideas. The first was that childhood was a distinctive, vulnerable stage of life that needed to be separated from the adult world. The second was that childhood must be prolonged to properly prepare children for adult roles. Throughout the 19th and much of the 20th century, these ideas served a positive purpose. They ensured that all children, regardless of class, benefited from a protected childhood sheltered from exploitation. In recent years, I believe it's fair to say, expert legal opinion has tended towards the view that has emphasized children's deficiencies. Research in brain science has been invoked to suggest that children and adolescents are less competent decision makers than adults, that they have a less mature capacity for judgment, a more unformed character, and greater susceptibility to peer pressure. Yet the history and sociology of childhood, as well as cognitive science, have revealed that young people are, in general, much more competent, resilient, adaptable, and knowledgeable at far earlier ages than we previously assumed. In pondering the issue of children's rights, we need, I think, to more fully embrace the notion of children's competence, while recognizing that the young are not blameworthy in the same sense as adults, and that young people are engaged in a developmental process in which their personal identity and values are formed through a process of experimentation and exploration. An emphasis on children's incompetence and immaturity has had many negative consequences. It seems clear, for example, that the desexualization of children and the emphasis on children's sexual innocence may have made kids more attractive as erotic objects. Meanwhile, our desire to strengthen the boundaries separating childhood and adulthood has made kids more vulnerable, not less. We live in a violent, sex-saturated, highly commercialized society where even young children are exposed to temptations, pressures, stresses, and choices greater than their parents or grandparents faced. A prepared childhood is better preparation for such an environment than a sheltered childhood. At the same time, our society's rigid age segregation makes it more difficult for young people to demonstrate their growing maturity and intensifies their feelings of marginality. Far from being a static, unchanging concept, children's rights has always been flexible and varying. The challenge we face today as we seek to formulate a notion of children's rights appropriate to our own time is to strike a far better balance between a conception of childhood as a period of growth and development and one that emphasizes young people's capacity for agency, responsibility, self-knowledge, and judgment. Rather than viewing childhood in opposition to adulthood, we need to foster those qualities that we associate with adulthood. Thank you.